Welcome to the Dads in Action webinar. Our presentation tonight is Overcoming the Mommy-Daddy Syndrome, Nourishing the Couple Relationship. As a lot of us know, keeping a couple relationship alive can be very difficult in today's society. Adding a bleeding disorder to the mix can complicate things even more. So this webinar will review some key concepts that will allow us to work better together to nurture our couple relationship and therefore provide a firm foundation for our children to flourish. Our presenter tonight is Dave Robinson. Dave has his PhD and is a licensed marriage and family therapist and director of the Utah State Marriage and Family Therapy Program. He has 5 children. 2 of his boys have hemophilia. So Dave brings his professional and personal experiences together to help couples and families work better together. I know he has a lot of great information to share tonight, so I will hand it over to Dave.
Good evening, everyone. So I'm here where there's snow on the mountains. I don't know where you all are, but it's a little cold here in Logan, Utah. But just want to give a little bit of background about me. I have 2 kids who have hemophilia, as Jane already said, and so I kept going to conferences and finding people sharing information about families and marriage or parenting or whatever, and I was kind of a little discouraged because most of them didn't know anything about hemophilia. And so I decided, well, I have the professional experience and I've also lived this life, so maybe I should start doing something about it. And so that's kind of when I started doing these presentations, and found them to be very enjoyable for me to do the research on it, but also to meet great people. Webinar is not my favorite option because I prefer to see your faces and maybe show video clips, but I think it is a good way to get information out to individuals who might not be able to travel or get places. So with that said, these are my 5 kids. I have a 19-year-old down to an 8-year-old, and here's a little bit of information about them. So I have bookend hemophiliacs. So my oldest and my youngest both have hemophilia. My next to the youngest child, he loves hemophilia the most because he gets all the benefits from it without ever having to have a needle shoved in his arm. And then I have 2 daughters who are, we're still waiting on the process of finding out if they're carriers or not. So that gives a little bit about my background as far as my experience with 2 boys with hemophilia. And also as a licensed marriage and family therapist, I'm what's called a medical family therapist, so working with families in illness is kind of my area of specialization. And so this kind of fits well with both of my worlds that I live in. One thing you shouldn't do with a child with hemophilia is hang them over a river, but if you have one with hemophilia holding the other one, I think it's pretty safe. But so just a little bit of fun that we have here. So parenting is kind of the focus of what we're talking about in the context of our couple relationship. So as you can see here, if you have a good dog crate, that parenting gets a little bit easier, but the authorities don't like it too much, so we have to watch out that we don't go that route. And also on the bottom hand side here, you know, sweetheart, don't interfere, let me run their lives my own way. You know, there's not really anybody that knows the exact way to parent, and so I think it's things like these experiences and also interacting with one another really helps us kind of develop who we are as individuals and helps us figure out a little bit of how we can do a better job at parenting. But what I want you to do is just take a step back just for a second and kind of check up on your relationship. What's going well in your relationship? What really works well for you as a couple? And what are some areas that you feel like you need to improve in your relationship? And finally, the question I want you to ask is, what is the impact of a bleeding disorder on your marriage? Because the other reason why I started doing this is we've had some dear friends who, because of the stress of the bleeding disorder and inhibitors and everything else, they ended up getting divorced. And that's a tragic experience for kids with hemophilia or any bleeding disorder because their intact family is no longer there. And so I'm hoping at some level that I can help even just one couple figure out ways to move things forward and stay together and make things happen so that we can create an environment where these kids, they have a hard time. Some of the challenges that they go through is very difficult, and so we need to make sure that we provide them that best environment. And obviously the best environment is an intact relationship. The next best environment is a good divorce, and the worst two is a bad divorce and or a really bad marriage. So the goal for this webinar today is I want you to find one thing that you can do differently, because what I find when I do therapy with couples is they oftentimes hear lots of things that their spouse can do differently, but that doesn't tend to help very well. So we want you to really focus in on one thing that you can do differently to make your relationship better. And that's where I promise that things can really start to change. So I entitled this Overcoming the Mommy-Daddy Syndrome, and what is that? Well, this is a common phenomenon that happens in today's society, that we get so busy with kids we forget about each other. We're mopping the floor and vacuuming and getting groceries and working, and we're doing all these things, and then we get home and we take care of the kids, and then at the end of the day it's time to go to bed without having spent any time together as a couple. And this mommy-daddy syndrome is what really causes problems later in relationships. You have couples who they get along just fine when the kids are around because they focus on those, but then the last kid leaves the door shuts, you look over and you think, who in the hell are you? You just haven't seen that person. You just don't know anything about them anymore because you've grown apart. And I think one of the key things that you want to focus on from this presentation is that if we don't nurture the relationship, it will get worse. And so some of the things that we'll be covering today will help you address that. So just a nice little cartoon there. Ring on finger means you're married. Rings beneath the eyes mean that you have children. So having kids has never been promised to be an easy experience, but it also can be a lot of fun. And we need to find ways to find the joy in life and maybe stop and smell the roses a little bit more. And just in today's society, we just get way too busy. So there's some actual good research out there on what does working on your relationship do for you. Well, here's what they found, that people who have a good marriage are happier, they're actually healthier, they live longer, they're more productive, they have a less emotional baggage, a greater sense of self, a deeper connection and belonging, improve intimacy, and more fulfilling relationships. So those are all pretty good reasons why maybe working on our marriage would be a good thing for us to do. Unless you really don't like your spouse much, then having a bad marriage means that maybe you won't live quite as long and it won't be so painful for you. But maybe we don't want to go that route. So a few marital myths that I want to address here that play a role with marriage in general, but also how hemophilia or a bleeding disorder of whatever sort plays is, these are all things that a lot of people say, it's all downhill after the ceremony. So, that's a pretty sad way to look at life. The next one is hemophilia, or fill in whatever bleeding disorder your family may have, is the most important. We can worry about us later. So we can table the marital relationship. And I don't know when the last time any of you maybe put an old car in your backyard and let it sit there for 20 years. It's not very, doesn't work very well after 20 years without having any input or any care to it. That's kind of how a relationship is. If you wait 20 years to start nurturing your relationship, you probably missed the boat. The other thing is you tend to hear lots of things, and the book's not as popular anymore, but men and women are from different planets. I prefer to think that men and women are fairly similar, and we have maybe different desires and wants, but maybe it's better to say we live on the same planet, we have to learn how to get along better. The next one, kids are important, so our relationship can go on the back burner for a while, along with that hemophilia quote earlier. The next one, we must not be in love because things are not like they were during the first part of a relationship. Well, that's not an uncommon thing. You know, life happens, careers get more difficult, kids come into the thing, and if we're not nurturing our relationship and we start comparing to, well, we don't do all these great things we used to do, so our relationship isn't any good anymore, well, again, that's a poor way of looking at it and doesn't help for creating a good environment for you. The next one, so if you're not happy, you should get out. Today we live in a disposable society. You know, if you just feel like you're not happy, you just can go and get divorced. And I've worked with hundreds and hundreds of couples, and I've yet to find somebody who's gotten divorced, unless, you know, for abuse or, you know, really significant experiences. But many of them kind of wish that they would have figured out how to make it work, because they find that, like I said at the beginning, marriage is more about us and what I need to do differently instead of what our spouse needs to do differently. And we tend to repeat those patterns with our subsequent spouses. And yeah, I know there's exceptions to that, and some people do find a better one the second time. But in general, it's better to see if you can work it out, especially if you have kids in the mix. The next one is, if we have arguments, it means we're not in love. I will tell you, as a marriage and family therapist, the scariest couples that come into my office are the ones that say, you know, we've never fought a day in our life, because what that really means is they really haven't lived. They haven't shared what's inside themselves, because couples aren't supposed to agree with everything. So there should be some bumps and bruises along the way so that there's greater intimacy. The next one, couples who don't fight have great relationships. Well, actually, the data shows that couples who have, you know, not physical fights, but disagreements, and they disagree with one another, and are able to resolve those, actually have better relationships than the ones who just don't have any of those discussions at all. And then finally, since what I see on the silver screen is real, we are really screwed up. And sometimes that's the opposite, because some crazy things happen on the silver screen. But we just want to not compare ourselves to the silver screen where everybody has a 3-hour orgasm and they just skip down the beach in great love all the time. So what do we want to avoid with families in the bleeding disorder community? Divorce happens a lot. And I don't know if you knew this, but you can actually buy a divorce cake now, so you can get one that looks like that one on the left. So we just need to make sure that we're doing a good job of not making that happen in our families. So if you can look at this, it kind of talks about that lack of care. Wanda, honey, come look at this old picture of us. We were so young and beautiful then, and they go throughout their day and throughout the night, and then at the end he says, of course, you're much more beautiful now. And she yells at him, took you long enough. And I think that's kind of what happens. We sometimes reminisce, but do we do anything about it? Do we step out and try to make things different for our families? Some of the marital relationship dilemmas that we come across, and you've probably seen it in your life or in somebody's like yours, is that kind of the naive approach is that marriage isn't like it was at first, so it's bad. Well, relationships should evolve, and if it doesn't feel like it was at first, what are you going to do about it? Can you just sit back and cry about it, or do you decide, okay, let's do something different, and let's work on it, let's have some fun? The next one is more of the hopeless one. You know, marriage can't be like it was at first, and so why try? So I'm just going to not try anymore. And finally, the disposable relationships. If it doesn't make me happy, it's over, so I'm just going to move on, and we just need to look at that too. So what we do know about effective marriages is that they tend to be relatively low in negativity and relatively high in positivity. So, you know, the positive to negative ratio has a pretty good balance. And it isn't that the effective marriages have no negativity. Because, again, if they're not communicating, if they're not sharing their feelings and thoughts, they're not going to run into those things that seem problematic. But it's by having those disagreements and sharing your personal experiences and wants and desires that really shows that you can work it through. So again, these couples with effective marriages are healthier. The unhappy are 35% more likely than the other unhappy or healthy ones to get sick, because it does. They have proven that it does improve your immune system. Your body's better able to fight off whatever may be going on in your body. And again, as I said before, they tend to live longer, and it adds 4 years to your life. So again, if you're unhappy, just make yourself even more miserable, and maybe you won't have to deal with those extra 4 years. But if not, let's see what we can do to change it. So let me just take a quick detour a little bit on talk about adult attachment styles, and I want you to really look inside yourself. Does this apply to you at all? And so do any of these explain you? So one is the avoidant attachment style. So people who, they tend to be really uncomfortable with closeness. So, the wife may ask a question and he's like, oh, whatever, and really kind of closes down, or, honey, how are you feeling? And he just really doesn't want to share what's going on there. Versus the anxious individual, they're constantly worrying about, oh my gosh, is he or she going to abandon me? And do they really care about me? and so what we want to look at here is both of these patterns don't work very well, because the one leads to gets away from emotional closeness, excuse me, and the anxious individuals tend to kind of overwhelm the other person. They're continually looking for what can they do to make sure that they're not being abandoned. Excuse me. So let's talk just briefly about chronic illness in couples. The first thing I want to talk about is our ability to put illness in its place. Again, whatever bleeding disorder may be in our family, sometimes we let it take over completely. So, we wake up and it's about a bleeding disorder. We go to bed, it's about a bleeding disorder. It just takes over who we are as individuals, and therefore it's going to take over our couple relationship. So we really need to make sure that we're doing a good job to put illness in its place. And excuse me, here's an example of that. We have a nice little family there, happy family, and they've put, for this example, put hemophilia outside. They realize it's a visitor. They may come in periodically, but they try to live their life as best as possible, just being a family, And some of it looks at how do we even describe who we are? Is our son a hemophiliac? Are we a hemophiliac family? Do we, is von Willebrand's how we define our daughter? What is it that we do with that? And it's really important for us to put it in the proper perspective that, yes, it's part of our life and it's part of our family, but we're not going to let it take over. We're not going to let it separate the couple. We're not going to let it make mom and or dad so stressed out that they can't engage with the kids. So just making sure that you're putting the illness in its proper place. Now, this is a crucible, and I think it's a good metaphor for working with any type of chronic illness, because what a crucible does is it provides a place for there to be great heat and pressure and an opportunity to take things that aren't very strong and put them together to create something that's really strong, steel, for example. Well, I think that's kind of what a bleeding disorder does to our families too. It can either be the thing that creates the heat and the pressure, and it breaks us apart, and we get burned off as do the impurities in making steel. Or we can choose to say, I'm going to live my life in the family crucible and find out how to become stronger, an individual, a stronger couple, a stronger family. And I think this is a great metaphor to think of. So maybe you'll all want to go out and buy a little crucible you can put on your bedstand and say, am I doing what I need to do to make things work? So what are some things that happen with bleeding disorders? And they can create difficult interactions in our families. And, the first two are fairly simple. This idea of enmeshment is that, people are too close with one another. When I was doing my master's thesis, I was actually pretty disturbed when I pulled up all the literature and what do we know about families with bleeding disorder in them. And this was back in the early 90s, and and that's all it talked about is these enmeshed families that mom and dad were, just hovering over this kid and not giving him any space, and he never learns to grow up and whatever. And it was just horrible. It wasn't my experience personally, and wasn't what I was seeing from the families in the bleeding disorder community. And so, but it can be a problem. And so something that we need to look at is that we're creating an environment where the couple is an important component, and that there's not, this over connection with mom and the son, or with dad and the daughter, or whoever it may be. The other thing is overprotection. We had a great hematologist that when our first son was diagnosed, he said, I can fix his body, but we can't fix his mind very well. So he said, do a good job to let him be a boy. Let him learn how to figure out what works. And that's proven to be very helpful for us as a couple. And we've let him do some things that we think are crazy. And it's all worked out okay because we've allowed him to learn where his limitations are. And now he's 19 and he has to take care of it on his own. And so we don't have any control of that. The next one is critical parenting. This one may sound a little bizarre, but we all know that now with the change in the Affordable Health Care Act, our kids can be covered on our insurance until 26, which is helpful. But there's still that push that, oh my gosh, we have to get this kid good grades in high school so they can go to college, or they can get this trade job, whatever it may be, so they can get insurance because they have to have insurance. And so it tends to be a way of us maybe being a little bit more critical and not as helpful. And then finally, the backburning of the marital relationship that can, again, cause problems. So some of the chronic illness and marital difficulties, bleeding disorders affect individuals and their relationships by changing patterns of interaction. So when before you had a child, or maybe some of you out there actually have a spouse or yourself has a bleeding disorder, once that's found out, it kind of changes the pattern of interactions, and we just have to be okay with that. It's not good or bad. It's just different, and we need to be okay with that. But we also know that coping with the chronic illness in general, but specifically bleeding disorder, we need to just be aware of the signs and assist each other when we start noticing. So if say for example, mom's been in charge of all the infusions and ordering the factor and making sure they get to the doctor's appointments, well, that can lead to a lot of stress and sometimes depression, fatigue, irritability. We need to check in and see what's going on there, and maybe realize that, okay, I need to step up a little bit more, or I need to step back a little bit and let somebody else help. Because I've seen it both ways, where two examples, one where the mom was overboard and really focused in on taking care of the kid, and even if the husband tried, she wouldn't let him. And the other side is where, it didn't matter what, he didn't feel like it was his job, it was hers, and so she really felt overwhelmed. So we just need to do a better job of checking in with each other and making sure that we're taking care of these simple signs when they're little, instead of letting them grow into something big. And what I have found with moms specifically who have done this for a long time, sometimes it's almost like a snapping point, 10 or 15 years or 5 years down the road. She just says, I'm done. If I have to do this by myself, I might as well do it by myself. Then I don't have to feel bad about not having having somebody there who's not helping me. And so, it's important for us to speak up if we feel like we're getting overwhelmed, but it's also important for us to reach out and take care of each other. So this comes from my master's thesis, and this was families who had recently been diagnosed with with hemophilia. Yeah, it was just hemophilia in this study. And what you see here is, you've all been through this, you know what it's about. The old world before you have a child with hemophilia, we kind of find a way to balance out the demands and capabilities and making sure we understand how to cope with life. And that's that pre-diagnosis period. But then you move into this other part where, the little arrow shows the diagnosis where, you find out that the person has a bleeding disorder. And that kind of throws us into this adjustment period and this uncharted territory where the bleeding disorder causes there to be more demands on us. And we haven't quite figured out how to balance things out. And what we found is with the families who did well is they didn't keep trying to go back to the old world. They didn't try to say, okay, let's pretend like we don't have a bleeding disorder in our family. They're able to accept it and just increase their capabilities and realize that, there's nothing we can do about it. And so they've learned to adapt to this new environment that involves a bleeding disorder in their family. And they actually do quite well. And so I found this to be very helpful for me to understand the process that I personally went through, but also with the families that I've dealt with since then. So another nice little thing that shows how marriages kind of get, the following program is intended for mature audiences. Hello, ooh, whoa, seismic. Are you thinking what I'm thinking, he says? That would be, we need to block this channel before the kids see it. You're such a good daddy. And final score, parenting 1, romance 0. So just make sure that maybe we reach out and have parenting be 1 and romance be 1, at least finding a balance a little bit there. So some of the common couple issues that we all know we come across, and again, what I want you to do is look at what is it that applies to you specifically. The first one that we can talk about is intimacy. And most guys, when you say intimacy, they hear sex. But intimacy really is about closeness with another person, both emotional, physical, sexual, spiritual, all of those things that play a role there. And so just kind of take a check and mental note on, how well are you doing with that? And what we found is that the thing that goes first usually is not the sex, it's the physical, the hugging, cuddling, kissing, touching, and just being there with your spouse. And then the sex kind of tends to wane as things go on. So maybe start by looking at how well are you doing at just that physical, non-sexual part of your relationship. The next thing is power and control. Again, when you add a bleeding disorder, this can be huge. Who makes decisions on what happens with the kid when he or she needs infusion or whatever? And money can be a huge issue. You shelling out hundreds of thousands of dollars a year if your child, or even more if you have a severe child with hemophilia. And healthcare is probably getting better in general, but still a scary thing for all of us. Gender roles, division of labor and work-home balance. Unfortunately, as women have moved more into the workforce, it hasn't equated to a significant change in the workforce balance at home with who does what around the home. So you may have a woman who's working 60 hours a week, husband working 40 hours a week, and usually there's still a fairly imbalanced relationship there. And so we just need to make sure that we're doing a better job of working that out. And if you have something that works, it's fine, sure. But oftentimes the women are left holding the bag there, and so we just need to make sure that we're doing a better job. And that's a role on both sides, both the woman asking for it and talking about it, and the man being able to listen and to do what he needs to do. Child rearing, of course, again, tends to be more the women, regardless of how many hours are worked outside the home for the man and the woman. And illness management, our moms tend to be in charge of taking care of the kids' illness in general. And just see what you can do to make that balanced out a little bit better. And finally, conflict resolution and communication. Couples tend to have a lot of emotional reactivity, and when stress is high, emotional reactivity is even worse. So if you're already stressed because your kid's been in the hospital or had a bleed or whatever the case may be, it's a lot easier to kind of just flow your stack there. So we need to be aware of that. And also, if we're looking at that individual responsibility, what is it that you're going to do differently? So if your spouse blows up at you, you can be the one that says, hey, you seem to be pretty stressed and something's going on. Can you talk with me about it? And that's a good way to diffuse the situation. But oftentimes we're like, you're not going to talk to me like that. And so you have two emotionally reactive people that lead to really having some problems there. And people have different personalities and temperaments, and we have to accept that. But we also don't have to just say that, you know, since he's a hothead, he can just do that. There needs to be some change as we go forward. Okay. And finally, the relational or marital satisfaction. You know, not shocking. It's initially high when couples first get married or first get together, but it tends to dip at predictable places, and you know, it comes when you have young kids, happens again during adolescence, and then when there's health crisis or one or both partners, which also includes the addition of a child with a chronic illness like bleeding disorder. And so we just need to look into that and realize that, sure, it's going to dip, but that's when we need to put a little bit extra effort into it and not just say, okay, that's how it is, and so that's how it's going to be. But we can really see that we can do a little bit different there. So let me talk a little bit about some relational patterns that tend to be problematic that we find a lot in marital therapy, but also occurs in most relationships. The first one is what's called the pursuer-distancer relationship. So this is one where, kind of as we talked about before, the anxious, more anxious attached spouse is always coming after and saying, you know, do you love me, and are you there for me, and can we talk, and can we go for a walk, and can we dance, can we do all of these things? And the other partner's like, no, 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 and maybe stays at work later or gets on video games or walks away. And so that pattern is the problem, not the person. So there's nothing wrong with somebody wanting connection. And there's nothing wrong with somebody needing a little bit of distance. The key is finding a way to make both people happy. So if the distancer, for say example, they need a little bit of space, but they were to say, hey, you know, I'm feeling a little bit overwhelmed right now. Could I just have 10 minutes to think this through, and then I'll come back and talk to you? Well, the pursuer, we find, that can do that. They can have that, but their fear is that you're not going to ever come back. So it's not about the pursuer being the problem or the distancer being the problem, but it's that interaction between the two, and that's what makes the difference, and that's what we work on with people in marital therapy. The next one is the common underfunctioner, overfunctioner, and this may play different roles for different people. You may have an over-functioning husband at work and an under-functioning husband at home, and vice versa. And we just need to look at how that plays out in our relationships. Because it's once we find and identify these patterns, that's when couples make difference and change. Because it's not about blaming or saying you're bad, but it's about finding ways to make things a little bit different. And the third option is this idea of triangulation. This is where couples tend to maybe not get along very well, and so they find a third person or a third entity to turn to. So this could be as simple as a husband and wife, and every time he fights with his wife, he goes and talks to his mom about it, works it through with her, and it feels better, and he goes back and his wife's not better, and you can't figure out why. Well, it's because he's brought in a third party and they aren't dealing with what needs to happen. Well, what we also know is that happens with illness. You know, if we're not getting along very well, we can just super focus on our child with bleeding disorder. We can really try to do a very good job of taking care of him or her and making sure that they don't have any problems. And we're, in essence, avoiding our conflict because we're focusing on a third person or entity. And that's really hard on a relationship. If we're not dealing with what's between us, that relationship starts to falter and leads to problems in the future. So this idea of triangulation is something that we just need to do a better job of catching and realizing that, hey, we all do it, and we just need to slow it down a little bit. The last thing I want to talk about before we switch to, I know it's been a little hardy on problems, but I want to talk a little bit about relationship distress, and then we'll switch over to what are we going to do about making our relationships better. And John Gottman is a big guy in marital research, and what he found is there are 4 things that happen in relationships that turn out to be pretty bad. And the couples that have more of these things tend to not do very well, and some of them end in divorce. The first one is defensiveness. And you all can sit there and point at your spouse on he's defensive or she's critical or whatever. But just remember the 4 fingers or 3 fingers pointing back at you is what we want you to focus on. So being defensive and just realizing that nobody can tell me what to do because I'm doing okay. So defensiveness and criticism kind of go hand in hand and can be really problematic. And especially when it comes to dealing with maybe a bleed. Think about maybe a vein was missed or medicine wasn't ordered or something, and so the other spouse says, why didn't you order it, or why didn't you put it in this way? And you can see how that creates that defensiveness, right, immediately. And if that pattern continues over and over again, then it starts to erode the relationship. And so we just need to watch that and see how do we change that. Not that the other person is bad, but what's going on between the two of us is the problem. The other 2, contempt probably shouldn't be happening, and it doesn't happen in happy relationships. This is where you're willing to say whatever it takes to shut the other person up. So for example, your wife is berating you and saying that you need to work harder and I need more help around the house, and you just say, well, you're a fat pig and your mom's a witch. None of those things we find are really meant. They don't want to say those things, but some people learn that, if I say something shocking, she'll stop bugging me. And so contempt is something that we really want to avoid in our couple relationships. And the final one is stonewalling, which is, you basically just pretend like I don't hear you and I'm not going to respond to anything you have to say. And if you think about a more anxious person, anxiously attached person, stonewalling is a scary thing for them because the thing that they're fearing the most, which is you're not going to be there for me, is right there in front of them. And so we need to watch these 4 things. And if you see them in your relationship, don't panic, but see what you can do to cut them out and slow them down. And finally, the couples with the child with chronic illness can have higher divorce rates and decreased satisfaction, but that is not what has to happen. And that, again, is one of the reasons why that I wanted to do some of these workshops. So I don't know if at this point I just want to take a quick break. Is there anybody that have any questions that you want me to address at this point? And if there aren't any, that's fine too.
One question, Dave, is kind of the guilt, and maybe you're going to talk about this in a little bit, but I know a lot of the moms kind of talk about the guilt factor that, because they were the carrier of the hemophilia gene, that, somehow they take the added responsibility for passing that on to their children, and how that might impact a relationship. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that's huge, and sometimes that's when that contempt comes out, when maybe the husband's not helping as much with the bleed or with taking care of the child who maybe is on bed rest or something, and that's where something can be said like, well, it's not my disease, I didn't give it to him. And that's one of the most damaging things that can happen, because that's the problem. You can't take those things back. And I think this is something that the moms out there need to talk to their husband about and say, I'm feeling kind of guilty here, and that's where the husbands can really step forward and say, you know what, this has nothing to do with you as a person. This is our child, and it just happened. This isn't your responsibility. You didn't cause this. None of the parents want this to happen to their child. And so that personal responsibility that a lot of women take can be alleviated within that marital relationship, because it needs to be the safe place to talk about those things. And if she can be vulnerable and say, you know, I'm feeling extra guilty after the birth of a child, and he's able to comfort and be there for her and help her realize that, you know, I don't blame you for anything. I mean, no one out there has, you know, sorted their eggs and chose a hemophilia egg to put out there to be fertilized. It's purely just, it happens. And so I think that's where that communication between the couple can really play a huge role in making it different. Any other questions? Okay. If not, I can go on and we can, if you have any, you can feel free to type them in the message box, and if I don't see them, we'll make sure that we get back to them later. Okay, so how do we make it better? As I said a little bit earlier, this is all about ratios. It's not about being perfect. It's not about saying that we're not going to have any negativity, but it is about having a better ratio. And so kind of the research out there is maybe we should have 3 positives to 1 negative, or maybe 5 positives to 1 negative, or maybe 10 positives to 1 negative. And maybe if you're at 1 to 1, maybe your goal is to move to 3 to 1. And not say, oh, I'm bad because I'm not at 10 to 1. So it's how do we move things forward? And the other thing is that we tend to get to the point where good is the expectation. So, you know, whatever you do, you cook dinner, or you go to work, or you watch the kids, or you mow the lawn, or whatever it may be, those are all, you know, you're expected to do that. So we'll wait and see when there's something bad, then I'll comment on it. And we need to do a better job of just being kind of positive. You know, thanks for dinner, thanks for mowing the lawn, thanks for going to work, whatever the situation may be. And is it really hard to just compliment our spouse and realize that they're doing something that can be helpful? So we just need to look at that and try to do a better job at doing that. The other thing is I sometimes do this with couples to actually have them stand on their feet and, you know, talk about what's more stable here. Is it the one on the left-hand side where they're leaning on each other and supporting each other, or is it that you stand on your own? And I think it's really important that we learn to support each other and mutually support each other, not be the, you know, I'm always the one in need and you're always the one that's the rock. But how do we balance that out a little bit better? The other thing that we find to be very helpful, and this one's something that everybody should implement into their relationship, is what's called softening the startup. You know, how we start a relationship, how we start a conversation can really determine the outcome. So if you were to, if your spouse was supposed to be in charge of dishes, saying, I can't believe you didn't finish doing the dishes tonight. That's a harsh startup. And it creates what? Defensiveness, exactly. But if you were to say, you know, hey, I noticed the dishes aren't done. Do you think you can get to them before you go to bed tonight? Is a softened way to do it. And so if we find a way to think things through, what is it that I want to accomplish, and how can I say it in a way that my spouse can hear it, we tend to do a lot better. So softening the startup is something that everybody can do a little bit better on, because we tend to jump in and try to fix things too quickly, and sometimes it comes across pretty harshly. So some things that you can do right now to make your relationship better is knowing your spouse. And part of that is learning to love them their way. So maybe for one person it's flowers and it's words of encouragement and leaving little notes, and for others it's It's, cuddling on the couch and gentle kisses and whatever. And sometimes we err on trying to teach our spouse to be loved the way that we want to be loved. So, if yours are leaving notes and that sort of thing, and your spouse, that doesn't mean anything for him or her, it's not that helpful. And so we keep doing the same thing over and over again, and it's good for us to kind of take a step back and say, how is it that my spouse feels love, and can I start producing some of that? The other one is remembering what you honor and respect about your spouse. This fondness and admiration goes a long way, especially maybe when you're having some troubles and trials in your relationship. Why did you get together in the first place? What was so special about that person? And really starting to honor and respect that greatness in this person. We may even couples who aren't getting along well, they can say, there's 50% of my spouse at least that I still love. Well, maybe that's what we focus on for a while until it gets up to 60%. The next one is connecting with your spouse. This needs to be on a daily basis. Finding those brief times when we can get together. And then the last one on here is that creating the shared meaning. And this is what has been found to be key for relationships. Sometimes we get into this, we're going to go and get married and have this great relationship. But that's kind of the shared meaning, and then we don't go beyond that. The shared meaning can be as simple as, what can we do fun this weekend, or what are we going to do for our next vacation? And even if you don't have any money, just the thought of going through and going to the library and choosing books and finding a great place where you'd like to vacation someday, that meaning takes couples a long way ahead, even if they never do it. And for those of you who want to research more on that, go watch the Walt Disney movie Up. Now these are simple things that you can do that make a big difference, and these are called the 5 magic hours. The first one is parting. So when you say goodbye in the morning, find out what your spouse, one thing that they're going to do that day. Takes very few minutes, maybe 2 minutes, 5 times a day, 10 minutes a week. Not a big deal. Just checking in and see what's going on there. Reunions, another one. Finding a way to have a stress-reducing conversation at the end of the workday. Not saying, the minute your wife walks in from work, you say, oh, the kids have been brats and they've done this and dinner's burnt and all of these sorts of things. That's not a way to really engage there. And it's not that you can't say those things, but maybe start out with, how's your work? What's gone on? What can I do to help alleviate some of your stress? Both directions. And having that secure person that you can always depend upon really makes a difference. Even if they don't know what to say, if you know that they're there for you, it makes a huge difference. Appreciation and admiration. Find some way each day to share some appreciation to your spouse. And this is really easy nowadays with texting. You can just take 30 seconds and text your spouse or your partner just a nice little word of encouragement, and or that you're thinking of them, and that can make a big difference. Affection, as I talked before, kissing, touching, holding, tend to go away a little bit in couples that are struggling, and making sure that we make that part of our relationship. And then the last one that I find very important is this idea of weekly dates. So all the couples who work with me in therapy, it's just a requirement. They need to go out on a date. And and I've worked with a lot of couples where there's a bleeding disorder and like, well, we don't trust anybody, or we can't leave our child with just anybody. Yeah, maybe you can't, but that's where you need to find somebody. So maybe your weekly date is one time a month you trade with another family with a child with a bleeding disorder, because you know that they know what needs to happen, or you bring grandma over, or whoever. And then the other 3 weeks of the month, your weekly date can be very simple. A Totino's pizza, a blanket, and a candle can make a weekly date. So sometimes we're like, oh, we don't have time or money. It's really about the effort and the commitment to each other. It's not about how much money you spend. In fact, a lot of times couples are kind of disappointed when they spend a lot of money on a dinner and they think, well, we could have spent this money somewhere else. So it's really about putting forth the effort. And if you're afraid to leave your child with somebody else, well, when you put them to bed, have your weekly date then and find that time to relax, regroup, and reconnect. So there's a need for effort. We need to do better here. And this is a pretty profound thing. Remember, working briefly on your marriage every day will do more for your health and longevity than working out at a health club. So all of you are out there cheering that you don't have to go to the health club anymore. But it's true. This emotional connection that you have and this emotional safety that you have with this person that you care and love about really creates an environment that that can create a healthy environment for you. And the research is clear that healthy marriage does actually do more than working out in a health club. And if you put them together, you have a healthy marriage and you work out together in a health club, you have double benefit. So you can live to age 370. So, when we run into problems, this is oftentimes the issue, that we get on either sides of the fence and we start fighting about it, and we don't realize that, okay, I can do something different here to make this better. And so one of the ideas of joint problem solving is, we just need to identify the problem. So we talk sometimes and teach our students about this idea of meta-communication, so talking about what's going on. So if you and your spouse are starting to fight and you just say, okay, let's take a step back. What are we fighting about? That's this idea of meta-communication. A lot of times couples, after they fought for 15 minutes, they have no idea where it started. They have gone from not doing the dishes to the kitchen sink to whatever, and that can be really problematic. So take a step back, identify the problem, and discuss the issue in calm. And so sometimes it's okay to just take a break. But remember, the key to this is there's always one of the spouses that fears that you're not going to come back. So if you take a break, there needs to be a clear understanding. And all of you have Aunt Martha that said on your wedding video, never go to bed angry. Well, Aunt Martha has forgotten some of the things, and maybe that's not the best clue. So sometimes if you're too tired, too exhausted, too whatever, it's okay to disagree and say, I think we're just too tired to even think this through. Could we talk about this in the morning? And you can both say, sure, calm down and move it forward. Get multiple perspectives. Try to figure out, what is it that he or she is trying to say to me, and how do I understand that? Brainstorming some solutions. So what could we do differently? And develop a plan. And part of this plan is that, if it doesn't work, let's figure out how to do it. And then revise it as we do, and then check in periodically to make sure that we're making a difference there. So as we start wrapping this up, one of the things that we need to do in resolving conflict is we need to just do a much better job at looking at ourselves. Stop blaming the other person and figure out, what is it that I can do differently. Try to be the first to confess, apologize, and say, hey, let's work this out. The alternative is much worse. Let's keep fighting and let's not be happy. I mean, sometimes we just get so stuck and entrenched in that anger that we realize that, oh my gosh, wouldn't it be much more fun to cuddle and go on a walk tonight than to scowl and scream at each other? The other one, self-disclose. Tell your story. When you said that to me, it's just really hard for me to understand. And I really felt picked on, and I don't know what I'm supposed to do differently. So it gives your partner a chance to really see that, maybe I can do things differently. The next one is, don't make backhanded confessions. I mean, that can be a huge problem, because this happens a lot. You have this great apology or this great thing that you've done, and then there's the big but at the end. Yeah, I was wrong, but if you weren't such a jerk, we wouldn't be having this problem. Well, those buts are what caused the problem. So if you can't say it without a but in it, maybe you need to rethink it. And then finally, search for solutions instead of blame. how are we going to get out of this problem instead of you're a rotten person, you never listen to me, you never care about me, whatever. Okay? So with the time that we have left, just wanted to get to the point where we can open it up for questions. As far as getting help, I can't stress enough the need for getting help early. So if you feel like you're kind of on the edge, get the help at that point instead of waiting 5 years. So, I just worked with a couple, they've been married for a year. I saw them 5 sessions and they're good to go. But if they would have waited 5 years, that would have been a lot of work, a lot of hard work on all parts. And so take that time to nourish your relationship. And there are marriage retreats out there. You can have your chapter maybe ask for something on or do something for marriage and how to work better as a couple. Marital therapy is always an option. There are always great books out there. John Gottman has written a couple of books that are very reader-friendly and can be very helpful for you. And there are also groups out there that can play a role. And so just so we can get finished with this, so my challenge to all of us is go out and make a happy life. You're in charge of making a difference. And so if your spouse didn't hear this, you do your part and then maybe have him or her listen to the webinar later and find a way as a couple that how are you going to integrate some of these things. The website there, therapistlocator.net, is where you can find a local marriage and family therapist, someone who specializes in working with marriages and families and can help you through if you're having problems, because sometimes it's a little bit more than you can handle, and having an innocent third party in the process can be a very helpful way to do it. So with that, I'll open it up for questions, and if there aren't any, thanks so much for your attention and time, and I hope you found something that you can pull from this. And that's a lot of talking, sorry.
It was fantastic. And I am actually, we're a relatively small group tonight, so I am actually going to open up the mics just in case anybody would like to ask a question or share. There we go. The mics are open. Ask a question or share some of your personal insights. Dave, I just want to know how you got the hidden cameras in my house, because some of what you said absolutely hit home. And my husband is actually in on the webinar tonight from, he's in Texas, I'm in Massachusetts this week. So points, and it's just really, really important to be reminded.
Thank you. Any other questions?
No, I think if you could you just go, were you able to get the final slide onto your presentation?
Oh, yeah, sorry.
Great. Oh, no, that's okay. I just wanted to first and foremost thank Dave for a fabulous presentation, and we would love to try and work out an opportunity for you to do this live, because I think that audience interaction and just sitting all in a room together would make it even better. But for those who are listening in, thank you very much for spending this hour with us this evening. If you know of anybody who's interested and wasn't able to attend, we did record the webinar, and I believe there will be a Facebook post in the next couple of days providing the link to that. You can always find information about all of our resources on our website, hemophiliafed.org. And, of course, any and all questions about programs or just HFA in general, always feel free to email us at hfaprograms@hemophiliafed.org. I also want to make sure you know that Dads in Action isn't the only webinar series that HFA does. Our advocacy team has a phenomenal series, and with all that's going on with the health insurance marketplace, their information is very timely, very important. I know we had a few blood brothers join us tonight, and I thank them. I'm sure they already know, but in case they don't, there are Blood Brotherhood has a live online chat every month. I believe that's the second Tuesday of the month. And coming up in December, we'll have our final Dads in Action webinar. We have not chosen a topic yet. So again, HFA programs at hemophiliafed.org. We would love to hear your ideas or suggestions. And in Wednesday, we will also have a Partners in Spouses webinar. So thanks again to Dave, and thanks to all of you. We hope you have a good evening, and we hope we'll see you again in December. Good night, everyone.
Thank you all.
Great job, Dave. That was a great presentation.
Thank you.
Really hit home with me too.
Yeah, I actually prefer the personal in person sort of thing, but again, it's good to get the information out there. So
yeah, no, this was great. Definitely hit home.
plus, I have some video clips that I can't show on the webinar, so those are a lot of fun too.
Yeah, yeah.
All right. I am having a hard time stopping the recording here, so I'm going to say tonight and end this just so that we don't have a little extra conversation on the end of the recording. And thank you, Sandra, very much for your help as well. And Dave, we will certainly be in touch very soon.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
All righty.
Good night.
Good night.